The mountain outside was silent, smothered in snow, but Elias knew the quiet wouldn't last. Somewhere down there, men were moving through the dark with a stolen child, and he had just decided they weren't going to keep her. The wind came hard off the ridge the next morning, carrying a low moan that worked its way through the trees like a warning. Elias didn't wait for the light to settle. He was already out the door before the sun had cleared the jagged horizon. The fire inside the cabin burned steady, stacked high with wood he'd split the night before. He'd shown her how to feed it, how to keep the flames hungry so they wouldn't die in the night. She'd nodded weakly, still pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the hide around her shoulders. "I'll come back," he'd told her, voice flat with certainty, "and I won't come back without her." Now, boots breaking through the crusted snow, Elias moved into the trees. Every step sent a muted crunch into the stillness. He followed the creek first, because if you were carrying a child in this kind of cold, you'd need water to keep her alive. It was an old trapper's truth. Men leave fewer tracks than thirst. By midday, he found them. Not the men themselves, but the signs they'd left behind. Careless boot prints skirting the frozen edge of the creek, a bit of cloth snagged on low branches, dark wool stiff with frost. He knelt, running the scrap between his fingers. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else, grease from an oil lantern. The trail bent east toward the lower valley. That meant they were heading for the old road, the one that wound its way out of the mountains toward the river towns. Elias knew that road, knew every frozen rut, every blind bend. If they made it that far, they'd vanish into the world beyond. As dusk crept in, he caught the first real sound, a distant cry, faint but sharp enough to freeze him mid-step. It wasn't the wind. The bottle man barked a laugh, slow to understand this wasn't a negotiation. The hatchet man shifted in his seat, but Elias's knife was already in his hand, the blade black against the firelight. "No one's walking away with her," Elias continued. "Not while I'm breathing." Something in his tone must have reached them, because the laughter died and the air went still except for the hiss of snow on the coals. The pistol man's hand twitched toward the snow at his side. Elias didn't wait. The knife flashed once, the hatchet clattered to the ground. The second man stumbled backward, but Elias was on him before his fingers could find the pistol grip. The fight was short, sharp, and over in seconds. When the snow settled again, both men lay still, the hollow filled only with the soft, wet crackle of fire melting ice. Elias bent to the bundle. The child was wrapped in rags, stiff with frost, her cheeks mottled with cold, but her tiny chest still rose and fell. He held her close under his coat, feeling the faint heat of her against him. The climb back up the mountain took all night. Snow drifted high in the narrow gullies, and the wind drove needles into his face. But each step was fixed on one thing, the glow he knew would be waiting at the cabin. When he finally pushed the door open, the warmth hit him like a wave. She was there, crouched by the hearth, eyes wide and wet when she saw what he carried. He laid the child in her arms, the fire painting them both in gold. She wept without sound, pressing her face into the baby's hair. Elias fed another log to the flames. The fire roared up, filling the room with heat and light, and it burned on through the night, through the next day, and every day after, because some fires, once lit, are never meant to go out.
Snow was falling in slow, tired spirals the night they took her baby. It wasn't the clean, glittering snow you see in picture books. It was the kind that stuck to your lashes and sank into your bones, whispering how far you were from warmth. Clara had no coat worth mentioning, just a wool shawl so thin you could see her breath through it. She was kneeling in the churned mud outside the cabin, her fingers raw and red, nails cracked from clawing at the frozen ground where they'd pried her child from her arms. Her cries were not the kind that carried far. They were the kind that folded in on themselves, small, breaking sounds, as though her body was too weak to hold grief at full volume. They were gone before the echo could fade. 3 riders, faces hidden, their horses leaving long, cruel lines in the snow. No name was shouted, no reason given, just the sound of hooves, growing smaller and smaller until there was nothing but the wind. Clara swayed on her knees, staring into the white void. Every part of her felt hollow, except the part that hurt too much to breathe. By the time she rose, if you could call it rising, It was only because her body refused to freeze in place. The world had narrowed to a single simple truth: follow them. She didn't know where. She didn't know how. But she could still see the faint tracks, and as long as they existed, she would move. Her boots were soaked through before the first mile. Snow clung to her skirts, heavy and wet, pulling her down with every step. Her hands had gone past aching. They were stiff and useless, hanging at her sides. She thought she could feel her heartbeat slowing, her legs growing clumsy, her eyes blurring in a way that had nothing to do with tears. She should have turned back. She knew that. But the thought of returning to the empty cabin, of touching the cradle and finding it still, was worse than dying out here. The storm was deepening, the wind sharpening to a blade's edge, when she saw it.
He'd heard too many cries in his life not to know the difference. This one carried the thin, piercing wail of a baby. His chest tightened, the sound cutting through the cold. But with it came another noise: laughter. Rough, careless, the kind of sound a man makes when he thinks the world is his to do with as he pleases. Elias ducked low, slipping between snow-laden branches, moving toward the sound. The slope narrowed into a small hollow, and there, by a dying campfire, he saw them. Two men wrapped in mismatched coats, a bundle of rags at their feet that shifted with a soft, weak cry. The sight rooted him in place for a heartbeat. He had expected to feel rage, but instead he felt something colder, sharper, like the edge of a knife that had been waiting too long to be used. In his cabin, far up the mountain, the fire would be burning, its glow keeping her alive while she waited. And here, in the hollow, Elias's hands closed slowly around the handle of the knife at his belt. The wind shifted. The men didn't hear him coming. The snow was falling heavier now, fat flakes swirling in the firelight like ash. Elias stayed low, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the two men by the dying campfire. One sat hunched, sharpening a hatchet with lazy strokes. The other tugged a bottle from his coat, drinking deep before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Between them, the bundle shifted again, a muffled whimper spilling into the cold air. Elias didn't move right away. He counted their weapons: one rifle propped against a stump, the hatchet in the man's hand, and a rusted pistol half buried in the snow beside the bottle drinker. They weren't on guard. That was their mistake. He stepped out from the tree line without a word. The snow masked his approach until he was just 3 paces away. When the hatchet man finally looked up, Elias's shadow already loomed over the fire. "You're gonna leave that child," Elias said, voice low and even, a flicker of light, far off through the trees. Not the cold blue of moon on snow. Something warmer, wavering, alive. For a moment she thought it might be the rider's campfire. She pressed forward, tripping over a root hidden beneath the drifts, catching herself with a muffled cry. Every step after that was guesswork. Her vision kept narrowing at the edges. When she stumbled into the clearing, she didn't see the man at first. She saw only the fire, a low, steady flame built under a half-roof of bark and pine boughs to keep out the snow. It was the sort of fire someone tended with care, feeding it slow so it wouldn't burn out too fast. Then he stepped into the light. A tall man, broad-shouldered beneath a battered coat, his face half hidden by a beard dusted with snow. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a quiet study, as though he'd been expecting someone to come staggering out of the night. Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. She swayed again, and this time didn't manage to catch herself. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, catching her before she hit the ground. His hands were warm even through the numbness, strong in a way that felt safe. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He only lifted her, light as if she weighed nothing at all, and carried her to the fire. The last thing she felt before darkness took her was the steady heat against her skin and the sound of wood cracking softly as the fire burned on. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold had sharpened into something cruel, biting through fur and flannel alike. Elias could feel it in his bones as he trudged back from the woodpile, arms stacked with logs. Inside the cabin, the fire he had built for her roared steady in the hearth, its light pooling across the rough-hewn floorboards like molten gold. She was awake now, barely. Her eyes, gray as the winter sky, followed him when he stepped inside. She was wrapped in the thick buffalo hide he draped over her earlier, but her lips were still pale, trembling when she tried to speak. They took her?" Her voice was a thread of sound, barely there. "My baby. They left me out there, like nothing." Elias set the wood down beside the hearth, crouching close so she didn't have to raise her voice. "Don't push yourself," he said, though every word she spoke carved a deeper mark into him. "No," she whispered, her fingers clutching weakly at his coat. You have to find her." He had questions, dozens of them, but he knew the look in her eyes. It wasn't just fear, it was a kind of desperation that could kill a person faster than the cold. "Tell me what happened," he said. Her gaze darted toward the fire, as though she needed its heat to steady herself before speaking. "It was men, 2 of them. Not from here. I was walking home from the mill, and they came out of the trees. They said I owed them something. I didn't, but they didn't care. Her voice cracked, the memory clawing its way through her composure. "They took Anna from my arms. She cried, Elias, she cried until I couldn't hear her anymore." Elias felt his jaw tighten. He had lived alone on this mountain for 15 winters, seen enough cruelty to know the kind that left no room for reason. But this, taking a baby from her mother in the dead of winter, was something else entirely. He rose to his feet, every motion deliberate. "Rest. I'll keep the fire going. You're safe here, and when you're strong enough to tell me more, we'll figure out where they went." Her eyes flicked to him, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because no one else will," he said simply. That night, Elias sat by the fire while she slept, sharpening the edge of his old hunting knife and watching the flames lick higher. Every so often, she stirred, murmuring her daughter's name like a prayer. He didn't wake her.